Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
There we go. Okay, we've started. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by my fellow astronaut, Julian Darren. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I've just come back from a trip, and I'm going to stumble around, and there may be something inside of me.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. There's not, if you're going to stumble around, is it because is it your legs? Is it your legs? We'll explain that one in a bit. Yes, I'm good, thank you. We're sort of recapping in an episode. Well, we've gone back. We've watched a sequel to the film we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about the Quatermass Experiment, or as it was released elsewhere, The Creeping Unknown from 1955. The first Hammer adaptation of a Quatermass TV show. And I'll ask you actually what you thought of this first before I give my thoughts. But so it's the first Quatermass film to come out from Harrow. But what were your thoughts when watching this?
Well, I think it's very sort of Twilight Zone-esque. I like the Lovecraftian elements of it. I mean, interestingly, the other Quatermass had that too. And I think that, although, I wonder, when did you give up being a rocket scientist? But outside of that, no, I mean, I think that it's a little uneven in terms of how it tells its plot. Like, there are things that it's just like, oh, the camera's broken. That's not going to be an issue. And then it's like, oh, we found the film. Now let's watch it. It's a little uneven just in terms of how it sort of telegraphs what it's doing. But I like the basic story. It's sort of like a combination of Lovecraftian horror with sort of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I do like this film, and I do like sort of quite a lot about it. I do like to say this idea of this thing from space that sort of attaches itself to this astronaut, Karun. And like you said, the fact that they talk about in the film about invasion, but I don't see it that way. It's just a thing that's living its life cycle, and is using Karun as a host. And there's some great moments. The guy who plays Karun doesn't really say much in the entire film, but Jesus, is he menacing at times. When he's sat in that car with his wife and just looking at her, it's really creepy. So there are moments in this film I really enjoyed. There's some really good stuff. The story's good, and the problem I have with this one is Quatermass.
I was wondering. He's a Yank.
He is. He is. My Quatermass is Andrew Keir, which is the 1967 Quatermass in the Pit. That's who I sort of see as Quatermass. But in this, he's just him being an American's less of an issue. I'm not so bothered by that. It's more the fact that at times in this film, I almost see him as the villain.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
His attitude towards these astronauts and towards what's going on is so dismissive and arrogant that it's really off-putting. But the other thing is, like you said, there's leaps in logic. And the thing we have to remember about this is it's an hour and a half, so it's almost 90 minutes, this film. But it's based on a 6-episode TV show from the year previous. It was broadcast in 1954 from the BBC, and it was broadcast as a live TV show, TV thing. So it was all it was broadcast live and wasn't fully recorded. So large portions of it have now been lost. So you can't see the whole broadcast. So it's based on 6 half-an-hour episodes. So there's an hour and a half's worth of storytelling that are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows in places, as you said. Like there's bits and pieces, like you said, the film is the best bit where they're like, the film's broken, the camera's destroyed. We have some of the film, but it'll look dark and grey and grainy. And you watch it and you go, looks like the rest of the film. It's fine.
Yeah, right.
I'm quite fine with it. Yeah, so there's these leaps where they've had to miss out chunks of subplots and all this other thing, and they completely changed the ending as well, which we'll get onto.
Mm-hmm. I watched the Turner Classic Movies version where somebody comes on at the end and they say they talked about how the ending was changed. But yeah, I mean, getting to Quatermass and how, like, I thought right away he comes off as very. It's not that first of all, I don't know why he's an American working on a British in Britain on a private rocket program, apparently.
So this is. I mean, we'll get to the fact this is a private rocket organization launching rockets into space without asking any permission. It was a hammer decision to make it more appealing outside of the UK. Mm-hmm. Simple as that.
He's very much like a stereotype of an American, though. Like, he's very John Wayne. He's very, like, brash. And he's almost like a parody of like an American industrialist. Like, those Yanks, they're all super confident. They say, I'm Henry Ford. This is my job. Right away, one of the first things he says is like, I wrote this down. He says, okay, the rockets come back. Clearly, like, the crew, 2/3 of the crew is dead. Yeah. The other one is like obviously insane and terribly damaged. And Quatermass says, I launched it and I brought it back. That's quite an achievement. And like, there's no concern whatsoever for these people.
There's a bet I love that because that's one of the ones I wrote down. Because then later on, one of them talks about, or someone confronts him about this happening. And about the way it landed or it crashed. And he actually says something along the lines, I'm a scientist, not a fortune teller. And in my head, I'm straight there going, no. Part of a job science is to predict what's going to happen. So you should have. Did you not have a return plan for this rocket? Was it like, because he says, I got a spaceship up and I got it back. No, it crashed. So you didn't technically get it back. Yeah. He's
basically Disney's Tony Stark before the Avant le Mot, He's that kind of like arrogant prick.
Yes, he is, and he's it's played by Brian Dunleavy, and he's in the second one as well. There's one called Quatermass 2, and it's clear they have a word with him. Because they're a bit like, can you be less Brian Dunleavy? I know that you are Brian Dunleavy. Can you just be a bit less of that? And he's actually a lot better in the second one. But it's even the end of this film, and we'll get to it. Like, he remains the villain. Like, my recollection of this, I actually admit I haven't watched this one for a year or two, was that he learned a lesson. That he loses these astronauts and stuff, but the exclamation mark at the end of this film is literally that he hasn't, because they say to him, he walks out like we completely, he walks out the finale, and they say, well, what will you do next? And he says, I will go back. I shall go back to launching my next spaceship, and it ends with the spaceship taking off, and you're just like, right, well, he hasn't learned anything. This film was pointless.
Well,
who would work with him?
I think that's I think that's kind of, he says, I'm going to start again. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, okay, so let's back up a second and say that, much like the original Fantastic Four origin, right? Like, before we got into space, who the hell knows what's up there, right? And who knows what we're going to encounter. And so this is actually much like it was at some earlier point, it was totally responsible to think, hey, maybe all of these planets have life and civilizations on them in our solar system. What a wonderful vision to be able to believe in. But by this point, it is totally responsible to think, yeah, maybe we will encounter alien life, and there could be something in, the space neighboring, the upper atmosphere or space neighboring Earth. Obviously, very unlikely, but that's not an irresponsible thing to think, right? Like,
No.
we don't know what we're going to encounter when we open this sort of Pandora's box. And then you merge that with the idea of aliens are not going to be like us, right? Like, they're going to be here. This is an energy alien that, like, kills organic things that it touches, and then, like, possesses somebody and kind of deteriorates them as a host. It's all sort of vague, as it probably should be, because there's no rule book for I'm an alien, see, and here's how my body works. But all that stuff is kind of cool. And so to me, I thought I saw the ending as, yeah, Quatermass is a dick. He's the sort of, it's going to happen again. But it's that kind of like classic horror ending of, like, or sci-fi ending of, like, the end, or is it? Like, we're going to go back up there. And whether it's in this fictional world where, it might happen again, or in the real world where, who knows, it could be the end of humanity. It nearly was in this film. It's just that kind of ending that lets it be open-ended and lets it apply to our world.
Yeah, and I do like that it doesn't stop him from launching more ships. It's more the fact that, like, he just has no. Yeah, I mean, there's a great moment. I mean, there's a sort of the part of the plot of this film is, like, Quatermass, and we'll get to there's some bits as well. I want to go back to the very beginning, but Quatermass acts as the sort of if this you could flip this round and he would be the villain chasing his the MacGuffin that's got away, the space MacGuffin that's got away. Like, he'd be the scientist chasing down ET or Mac or whatever, right? That's who he sort of comes across as at times. And there's a great conversation with him and Karoon's wife, when she sort of confronts him, because he says about the two that have gone, and then Karoon sort of being, we have to do this work test on him and stuff. And she confronts him and says, "You don't care whether he lives or dies. You really don't care." And he says, "Well, even dead, he will be seen as a national hero. Like, he went up and he went to space and did this amazing thing. Like, he'll be seen as a national hero." And she's like, "Yeah, as a dead hero." And he's like, "Still a hero." Like, it's this attitude, like, there's still this, like, lack of compassion. There's a blind ambition to achieve, to barrel forwards, which, let's not be coy, exists in the real world and has driven us forward in technological advances. But when you see it on screen in this way, you do go, yeah, that's not good.
You're welcome, because my country did all of that, and we're the greatest country in the world, and you're welcome, Henry Ford.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it is that kind of, like, capitalist sort of unapologetic capitalist. It does remind me of Henry Ford. That's sort of like, well, I don't, if you don't like what the newspapers say, just buy them.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's less about wealth here, and it is at least tied to some kind of, like, scientific know-how a la Tony Stark. But, yes, I mean, absolutely, he does seem to be the villain in some ways.
Yeah. I do. The thing is, though, whilst being the villain, I do like the fact that, like, there is a level of authority there. Like, he is going to continue to try and at least sort of try and do the right thing. However, again, I know it's a film and they've got to progress forwards. I like the fact that in the first opening, like, you get the ship crash in the field, in the farmer's field and stuff, and the fact that this thing crash landed back in Britain is insanely coincidental. but fine, you know, there's always ways of explaining that.
Mhm.
And I like it though when he turns up and just everyone sort of just accepts that he's actually in charge, and you know, like the fire brigade, the police, everyone just doing as they're told.
Well,
Even when it sort of seems counterintuitive, like he's told them not to do something, then he tells them to do it, and they're just like, all right.
well, there's even that, I found that very bizarre too. And there's even that newspaper headline that says like, Quatermass refuses a police inquiry. It's like, what is the system here?
Yeah, there's no checks and balances on this because it just says Quatermass says no. And it's like, and I can imagine just like that was probably the interview. Brian Dunleavy's just gone no. You go, all right.
Oh god, the cops come to your house. I mean, they haven't even tried that in Iron Man. Like, lots of people are dead when you were flying drunk, Tony. Tony says no to an inquest. I thought that was very bizarre.
There's a little bit, and it feels a bit like they're sort of like, we know this is going to be looked at, but we're going to propel past it. Like I can imagine in the TV show there'd be more time given to that, but we're like, we can't address that. Move on. But it is quite fun. It moves at a pace. I mean, that's the one thing I do like is pace. But I mean, if you get past Quatermass, the one that we'll get to the bigger. There's some issues I found quite interesting, especially relating it to like Elon Musk and sort of like private technological endeavors. But the one thing I would say is you said about the alien before, or the entity. I like the fact one of the things that you and I have talked about before is we're not huge fans of the humanoid alien, and this film sort of gives you something incredibly alien. Like it's a possibly a plant-based energy life form that sort of leeches energy off things, and then like uses the last of the remaining astronauts as a host, and then metamorphosizes his body into something. In today's, if you were to say, he would end up like being, again, pretty humanoid. It'd be sort of like scaling thing. No, it's a massive blob of like stuff. I love the fact that there's no compunction to go, oh yeah, no, we've got to see him walking around a lot, so let's make the final alien look human or whatever. Like they go full alien. What were your thoughts on that?
No, I love exactly that same thing. I think that, like, you do have him because he's possessed. You do have, this actor going around, the surviving astronaut, Victor, as, the human identification figure. So you still can have the alien be human without it really being human. But you get to that final thing, and it's it looks like a sort of like cross between the Blob and a giant spider. In a scaffolding, which is cool in Westminster Abbey. So I mean, it's a lot of fun, and that's kind of like, oh, that's the FX shot, right? That is the big climax. So I think it's in some ways it's more traditional than you're describing, but I agree 100% that we both love that, like, make it the alien's alien, and so I love it for that. It's doing something very ambitious with that. But I do agree that if they did it again, like you would have like some sequence on the ship that would be like, as we're on the ship, we're envisioning what are they going no to on the ship if it's
invisible.
It's an invisible thing that possesses them. I think if they remade it, they'd say like, well, what they're seeing is Keanu Reeves, a vision of Keanu Reeves.
Because there's a couple of things with what he ends up being. Because it starts off like a lock room mystery. Like you've had one astronaut left, and there's two, missing. And I like the fact that they give you the evidence straight away. Like they'll go in and be like, no, they were, these suits are linked suits and they haven't been opened, so then they must be somewhere. And they're like, look, they look at it and they're like, well, they can't get off the spaceship. There's nowhere for them to go. They're not here, so where are they? And then it's revealed later, and because that's the good thing about this. I'd like to have seen the full TV show because I'm sure it's drip fed even more. Is that they say later on, Victor Karoun breaks into a chemist shop and attacks the guy there, and again, there's a nice scene the guys are trying to help him, and it reveals his arm, and it's all messed up. But when they finally get there and find him, they sort of look at what he's been doing. What was he after? And it's this combination of drugs and chemicals. And they're like, well, Victor Karoon wasn't a chemist. And they're like, no, but Green was. And you realise that, like, oh, he's absorbed. Like they've sort of said it, but like, no, he's absorbed the other crew members. Like, and there's these nice little reveals. Like it's done really well. Sort of like you have to earn some of the bits and pieces that's going on. So,
well, and I think that's like you're right. And I hadn't thought about that, and that is possibly a leftover from that earlier version because I know that the original ending is that they're still in there and you can appeal to them.
Yeah,
but that doesn't come back. It's just there, and that's a cool idea, right? But the idea that because the idea in the pharmacy scene is that he's trying to get drugs that would kill him. And they say, well, what, so apparently that's Green fighting to kill the host, to kill all of them. That's a cool idea, but that's like a leftover from this earlier version.
Yeah, and there's other bits and pieces. Like they seem to build up to this ending. The film builds up to the TV show's ending, and then you don't get it. Because you get that one scene with the chemist. You also then get the Frankenstein sort of scene with the little girl. So there's a little girl playing next to a canal with a doll, and then sort of Victor Karoon turns up, and she sort of tries to make friends with him in the most aggressive way possible for a little girl. She's like, "Do you want to have tea with me? Do you want to play with my dolly? Come play with me. Play with me." She's really creepy. Like I think that's why he runs away. He's like, "No," but he sort of like he sort of. It's totally Frankenstein where he sort of lurches and then it stops him and he runs off. So there's this whole thing throughout the film of it's the human trying to continually fight the alien. And we should sort of explain this. In the original, the creature is cornered and Quatermass confronts it and talks it into committing suicide to save mankind. So there's the same ticking clock that it's going to spawn and it's going to do all this other stuff. And he talks into committing suicide to sort of save people. And again, it's this, that sort of, I can't imagine Brian Denlevy would just turn in and be like, "Kill yourself. You're a pain in the ass. Do it." Like,
you've got a duty.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the original, it was about compassion. It was about understanding. And it's about this idea of humanity and stuff. But obviously they don't get to that ending. They just electrocute it and execute it. And so these scenes they've kept in don't ever really come into play. They're good, and I like them, but they don't really come into play, which is a real shame. I don't understand why they didn't do the ending from the TV show. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But
well, I mean, I feel like not having seen the ending from the TV show, that's a very passive ending, right? You've got to have that monster kill a bunch of people before you've justified that ending without it feeling passive. And I think especially, I mean, if you're making the decision to cast an American for a larger audience, you probably want your Marvel, ending with, got to have some punchy.
Yeah. But especially the thing again, going to Westminster Cathedral, having that thing of, I also love, there's another thing we'll get into in it, but like, if you're going to go to Westminster Cathedral and you're going to go, there's got all these religious connotations about the sacrifice and all that kind of stuff, and then not to have that play out as a theme.
Oh yeah,
seems like such a waste.
But just the backdrop then, right? It's not symbolic. I mean, I'm an American, so it's like, oh yeah, that's Westminster. I've been there. I remember that.
You may have watched a 50s documentary about its restoration, according to this film.
Right. I love I as a BBC aficionado, it's fun to watch the BBC. But also the weirdness of like the way this is structured, like finding out the camera's broken. I love the initial mystery. And then, well, we've got the camera. And then only then did they say, oh, well, the camera cuts out now and then. It was designed to do that. it seems like so many of those problems could have been solved with one-liners, right? Like the guidance system was able to bring it back down in Britain, at least. Okay, one sentence, right? One sentence about why, the government defers to this guy as a private, as you said, Elon Musk kind of guy. It would take one sentence early on to just say, well, we'll see whether the film is there. But, you have a sentence about how it cuts out. Just get that as early as possible so that doesn't seem convenient. It also apparently can cut to shots of the dials.
Yeah. There's a line for that. There's a line for that, which is probably one of my favorite moments of that section. So they go to like a shooting room where they're showing the footage, and they're all sat there in little cinema seats. And at one point, it clicks it goes from a shot of the astronauts in the shuttle to this shot of a bunch of dials, and you hear in dialogue that Quatermass just goes, "Oh, that pivot shot that we installed worked incredibly well." And then when it goes back to him, he's basically sort of elbowing one of his mates in the ribs, like, "Yeah, that worked well, didn't it?" He's
so
like,
proud.
yeah. Look at another achievement that I've added into my ship. And so
as they use it as forensic evidence for the deadly.
Yeah. So it's.
But what I was going to say, like the BBC has to cut transmission, and they do it twice. It's like, why do you do it twice? Just just streamline this plot. Do it once. I don't know, but it is fun. It is wonderful having that tilt shot as they tilt upward, and it's like, look what's up there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I kind of like the idea of what they do with the ending of this. Like, it's all caught on the fact that it's caught on camera. It's obviously sort of, it's twofold. It's a bit of a nod to the fact that it was a BBC show that was shot live, but I also kind of like the fact, and we said this with Quatermass and the Pit, like, there's evidence of this. There's now film. It's broadcast across the BBC. This thing is there in Westminster Cathedral. There's no denying it. And so I find that kind of interesting, that it's not sort of like, we've kept this hidden, it's whatever. It's like, oh no, we broadcast this bad boy by accident or whatever. It's that whole thing. I do think it's the ending. Like, there's more. There was a much better ending to this that could have played out, I'm afraid. But
I mean, I did find myself thinking about like that hijacked signal that that was very famous, where you can watch it on YouTube, and it's like, yeah, people saw this live, and we saw and figured out exactly how it was done. But there are going to be people the British government is going to deny that this happened, and people are going to say, no, I saw that on TV. Yeah. And then, of course, the same British junking thing that destroyed the original episodes and half of Doctor Who, will, destroy the originals. So what was the better ending?
So I said just that end. I like this ending of, you said about, I don't know, a letdown or whatever, this idea of it being talked into committing suicide. Mm-hmm. I think the thing is that you need the stakes of what is it doing, and I think one of the things they remove from this story that I think is a mistake is Karun's wife. Mm-hmm. She sort of she plays an active part throughout the first sort of half of the film. She's not shy. She confronts Quatermass repeatedly for basically being a dick. She's like, you've got no compassion for the crew. This is all just about your blind ambition. Like, she's not afraid to face up to him, to the extent that she goes out and hires a private investigator or whatever to help her break her husband out of hospital. And that is what causes, because then he goes and runs off into the night. But it's basically sort of like the shock of seeing his arm drives her crazy, almost drives her out of her mind, and it takes her out of the film. And I think, then you're reliant on Quatermass and whatever, then his cronies. Like, there's a couple of people. There's like the world's least effective detective from Scotland Yard who basically just takes phone calls and then follows Quatermass around. Um, that's all he seems to do. He takes a phone call and says, "Get Quatermass," and then they go off to somewhere else. He just stands there. He's useless.
I
What I
think
would
that
like
was
to,
the plot of one of those Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies.
yeah, basically. The thing is, I say there's so much in this one. We said it a bit with Quatermass in the Pit, but there's so much in this that I see in early Doctor Who,
Mhm.
and it's no wonder that Hammer then picked up the first couple of Doctor Who stories and remade them as TV shows as well. But one day we'll cover those. Those
I
Doctor
quite
Who
like
stories.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're good. I think they're good. They're different, but what I would like to have seen is if we're going to keep the Dunleavy Quatermass, and he sees it as executing it, as he does not see that there's a human element left in this. It's almost like that, that sort of thing of saying, that's not your husband anymore, kind of thing. Like that's because that's
Yeah.
where he's at. That's where his head is at. I would say, okay, keep that because he's that. Then keep the wife. And so you've got the ticking clock of it's going to spawn, it's going to do this thing, but then it becomes almost like a race between her and keep someone with her, and between her and Quatermass, who can get to the blob first, who can get to the alien, the Karoon creature first. And I'd say to have it be her, and then have that the moment where she's the one that she recognizes that it's no longer her husband. There's no safe, and she's the one that convinces it to commit suicide. That's the ending I'd want to see. If it's almost when I was thinking about this, and I was actually thinking about this morning. Have you seen American Werewolf in London?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've had this debate before. The end of that film is, David turns into the werewolf. He goes mad in London, and at the end of it, he's cornered, and what's her face, the nurse, and I forget. Oh Christ, what can I remember the actress's name? That's terrible. He's been dating, sort of steps forwards and tries to talk to him. And sort of like you see the werewolf's face, the eyes sort of like droop, it looks sympathetic, and then it snarls and jumps. And part of me has always said there's a part of David in there that was almost like suicide by police. Like, there was too far for the werewolf to jump. It was suicide by police. That was the end of the film. And I felt a bit like there could have been that in there. That like she ends up breaking through the police line. It's her that sort of like, it doesn't attack her. It wants to, and you can feel that there's a way of conveying it. Like, there's a struggle. There's within the alien creature, and she's the one that says, if you're still in there, if you still care for me and our species or whatever, the only thing you can do is to kill yourself. And to me, to give it then that choice, I think would be quite satisfying to me. Like, I don't, we've said we don't need that big dramatic ending. I mean, if you want it, you can it can jump on a big spike or it can do something. I don't know, but I think that would be way more of an interesting angle to me than it's sort of compassion versus science and duty.
It looks like Jenny Agutter.
Jenny Agutter. There you go, Jenny Agutter. Yeah, she lived in my dreams as a young adolescent. And if you've ever seen Logan's Run, another film maybe we'll do one day. Yeah. Oof, that costume.
Yeah, I don't even remember it, and I've seen it in the last few years. So I guess I had to be younger. I had dreams about Deanna Troi. So
Yeah.
On less masturbatory topics. No, I agree with you 100% about the wife, and that the wife is an important sort of foil to Quatermass. And I don't like that she goes that insane, right? I mean, there are a lot of shrieks in this movie. Everybody's response is to shriek and then die, or shriek and go insane. I do recognize like the shrieking and going insane. I mean, that's also a sort of Lovecraftian cliche, right? But I mean, I find that while it's possible to do it well, right? And I get what you're saying about the Westminster, the symbolism, but I find the sort of like you're still in there somewhere kind of cliche painful. And I usually just hate it. It's like it's such a Deus Ex Machina. It's such a way of getting out of, so many bad movies use it. I kind of like the maybe it's because I'm a Yank, but I like the fire, kill it business. But I agree with you about her and how she's dismissed too early. I think some of the most amazing stuff is the best stuff is getting him out of the hospital and the scenes with the wife. And so I think having her there to try to appeal to him and, sort of like say, no, we've got to break, and then say, yeah, this isn't working. I've got to say goodbye to my husband. But then that would be a whole different sort of like, that could provide a whole different emotional through line through the film where she becomes really, another primary character of sort of, you see her get that phone call of, the ship's landed and, you really focus on her more. And I think that would be, a much more successful film in my eyes.
Yeah, I think she should. She, like you say, the actress who plays is very good, really strong, and I think, like you say, she's notable by her absence in the second half and stuff, and I think it's a real shame because, yeah, she's a really good presence, and she's, like I say, she keeps Quatermass in line at times, and calls him on stuff, and there's so many moments in the later part of the film when you would want to be like, yeah, this is the, like you said, the emotional through line of this is actually, her coming to this realization of like it's not her husband anymore, or there's something more going on. I understand what you say about the cliche of like you're in there, and I've seen it. Like say, it's a true cliche. It's been used, God knows how many times. I would say like I don't know how much of a cliche it was in 1955, or even 54 when it was originally used. But yes, it's a sci-fi trope, isn't it? I mean, even The Fly. We talked about The Fly in the last season, and that very much has a similar ending of Seth Brundle when he puts the shotgun to his head, and asks Gina Davis to shoot him. So which is a very sort of similar sort of tale. But yeah, I don't know, there's just a sort of a and maybe again I'm just so used to the cliches it's interesting, but this thing of like the instant execution, the sort of like the shoot it kind of sort of thing of just finding a way to kill it off and killing it off is usually the sort of the resort of the militaristic element. Like you'll have the cliche would be they'd have like the SWAT team there or the military there, and they're the ones going like, I mean, it almost comes back in Quatermass in the Pit that when you do have the army there, they're the ones that are sort of like being in that vein, and Quatermass is the more intellectual sort of like compassionate response. Here he's the one that's like kill it. And so I don't know. I understand it. I don't know. It just feels so cutthroat towards the end of this film. And it's not a changing character. Like he's been like that throughout the film, so it's not like it's a change of Quatermass. It just feels a little bit too. If anything, it feels too straightforward. Like
Yeah. Well, I find myself wondering a couple things about it. I mean, to me, I like. We're gonna be looking at some use of like 50s miniatures and stuff like that. I love the FX shot, right? So like I like the money shot of like, here's this alien, up in the rafters. And then, what are we going to do with it, right? Obviously we can't animate it and have it like get in fist fights with people. So, we're going to show it being burned, and shoot it through the windows and stuff. And, I mean, that it's 55, right? I mean, that's pretty money shot FX stuff, So, I mean, I'm down with that, but I did find myself thinking, as you say, I mean, I find myself thinking a couple things. One is, how do you know what its life cycle is, right? They're like, they're sort of guessing it's going to split up, and then, well, you're right there, like shoot the parts. I mean, how do you know how it's going to split up and it reproduces every 80 seconds or something. Like we've not seen anything like that in the film. But the idea is clearly like civilization, or at least London, is about to be destroyed, right? So you've got to get that stakes established in dialogue. But I find myself thinking, first of all, how do you know that it's going to be destroyed by fire? You haven't successfully destroyed any of these things. There's that slime on the floor that just, I guess it's dead. It just like, went for these mice and broke out of its tank, and I guess it's dead on the floor. There's slime like on the wall from where it's supposed to be in Westminster, where this sort of repair guy who was doing the restoration fell from the scaffolding. Is all that slime potentially alive? How do you know fire's going to... I mean, there's just some biological things there that I'm not quite sure how they know. And then there's nobody who says, is there any way we could contain this alien life? Like maybe it'll prolong this astronaut suffering, or these 3 astronauts suffering, and God knows the pharmacist and everybody else, but our first encounter with alien life and we're just going to kill it. It doesn't sort of sufficiently sell for me that you have to do that.
No, if you were to take the Andrew Keir Quatermass from '67, the Quatermass in the Pit version, that would be his stance. But because for 2 reasons. Firstly, we've seen that the smaller version, the one in the lab, starved to death. Couldn't get to the mice in time. It starved to death, and so they sort of leave it. So there's a version that just says, "All right, well, isolate it then."
Yeah.
We haven't got to do anything. We've just got to capture it, and we've got to isolate it in a big tank. And if anything, you can be like, I can imagine Quatermass being like, "Look, if we can isolate it, it can't spawn, it can't travel anywhere. We can try and communicate with it. Let's see what can happen." It's this instant, let's kill it, that just sort of feels so out of place. I should say there's a couple of things to note. So there's the alternative ending. Nigel Neal, who obviously writes everything Quatermass. He obviously wrote the original TV show. Hated the casting of Brendan Levy. Hated the way that they changed the character. And said like it's not his, hashtag not my Quatermass. And when
he was very ahead of his time.
Yeah,
using hashtags in the 50s.
Yeah, no one knew what he was on about. And they were like, "What are you saying, Nigel?" And he's like, "Oh, hashtag, I'm out." But yeah, he tried. Apparently, he kept trying to get himself involved in the film, and the BBC stopped him because he was a contracted employee with the BBC, and said, "No, we own the IP, and we've now sold it to Hammer, and they can do with it whatever the hell they want, basically." So get back in your box and write the next one for the next year. But yeah, he made it very well known, especially later on, that he really did not like this version of the retelling of his story. And to the extent that he kept pushing for the BBC to redo, because obviously a lot of the footage was lost, to redo later on the Quatermass Experiment, and it was in 2005. They redid it as a on BBC 2, BBC 3, I think. I've got it on DVD, but they redid it as a live broadcast, and they maintained the original ending and all this other stuff. It's very good. Jason Fleming plays Quatermass, and he plays him a lot closer to how I expect him to be. So if this is the 55 version, and that's what we're talking about, but there are other versions of this out and about in the ether. But the 2005 version is worth seeing, I think. But yeah, it's just said that the original creator doesn't like this version of Quatermass. is quite an interesting sort of take.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I like. It's interesting, you were talking about like the Doctor Who connections, and we're in the weeds as far as like the BBC history here, and the connections there. And I know last time we talked about sort of like that Quatermass is sort of ready for a franchise, ready to be brought back, albeit not this version, right? Not because this is I mean, you were saying, like the solution, just shoot it, it's I'm a Michael Bay apologist, but it's a little too Michael Bay.
It has its place.
Yeah.
Like I say, there are films there are films and there are characters where that is the right response.
Sure.
It just
Independence Day is not going to be made any better by adding metaphysical themes. Okay.
Yeah. But it just doesn't seem to work. It just feels out of place with this character. And that's where the ending is. The sort of, and that was always Nigel Neal's bugbear, was that you've made him too aggressive. I think the term he said is you've just made him too brusque and too abrupt. He doesn't feel like he's thinking anything through, I think was the quote I read. And I can see that in the character.
It's weird. I mean, this is, it does almost feel like an American version, right? Like, those Brits would have all died if it weren't for the manly American who took charge and just said, no hesitation here, we kill it, burn it. Those Brits would have wanted to negotiate with it probably, or establish some kind of communication with an alien. We know what to do with aliens over here.
I said, we'd have had a referendum about it, and then we'd have all quietly grumbled about it taking over the country.
We shoot first and ask questions later, and that goes for aliens, and that goes for schools.
Yes. Yeah. There's a line. I don't know if you've ever seen this. I think it's quite relevant recently. I'm watching Ash versus Evil Dead, and there's a line in that where Bruce Campbell says, he says, shoot first, think never. It's just like, yeah, but I mean, that's the thing.
That was our foreign policy for a lot of years in Latin America.
Yeah. But I do think that's the point. Like this leans into something, and again, I love the sci-fi elements of this film. I love the concepts. This idea of this alien thing that's come from space, and the fact it's not a little green alien or whatever. Like it's not. There's no flying saucers. This thing, it just exists in space, and that's the other thing as well. And they just come to the conclusion as well. There's a lot of that, of just going like, what if there's this, and this concept they come up with just happens to be spot on. But I like this idea of like, no, there's this energy being, or there's this thing, it just floats around in space, and when it gets an opportunity to do so, it will cling to a new life form, and then it will spawn, and it will spore, and then it will go off and do its thing again. That's a really cool idea. The sort of the sci-fi concepts in this are really cool.
Right. And well, so first thing that's cool is like there's something living in the vacuum of space, right? Yeah. That, the place where we at the time would have thought was the most lifeless. Now, interestingly, we know that's correct. And we know that, spores can survive in space and reconstitute themselves, come out of hibernation. So at least we know now that's a more conventional form of life. But I mean, the idea that obviously 99.99% of space is, not filled with Star Wars meteor, asteroid belts and stuff. But the worm. But right, is a void. But we also do know that like they were onto something here, thinking about that. Secondly, I mean, I don't know why that being would not fall to Earth, right? But maybe it's not affected by gravity. But I like the idea that it's, I mean, they just hypothesize that it's an alien being, but I mean that it's a energy being. But I like that, it's like, well, why would we've built these walls like to keep radiation out and to keep oxygen in? What if there's, how do we know that, to another being, those walls aren't just porous? It just goes right through those walls. That's a cool idea. I think where it fails is, look, it's cool footage. I love the mystery. I love the footage of like, what are they reacting to? Yeah. It could have been done a little better, but yeah, I mean, I love that mystery and I love that footage, and I love the central premise of like, as you say, something truly alien.
I think all that really works really, really well, and should, especially if, like you say, we've talked about these things and we've gone back to the 50s and constantly said like the concept of this is really cool. I think the 50s sci-fi has got some really cool ideas. The other thing I'll say that I find interesting is the spaceship itself, and it's very sort of it's 50s. It's very, it's on a budget, which is fine. However, I'm fascinated by the fact they kept it incredibly utilitarian. Like, there's no fancy tech in there. It's like a submarine.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a tube with a couple of beds in, and they've got a hatch that takes them down to the engines, and then they've got like a panels with some sort of with dials and some tech on. That's it.
Yeah.
And he says, I think he said they've gone up to, is it 1,500 miles above the face. I think at one point they drop a line and say how far up they went. That was the idea, to go up and come back. They've gone up 1,500 miles. That's, again, so they've cut these ideas. But I love the fact there's a great shot when they do the footage, and it's to show that there's no gravity. So obviously I don't think they sort of understood that. But there's a guy sat at the desk, and someone walks up the side of the wall, and then walks back down again. And I'm going,
yeah,
and it's just there. It's a
physical. It's a practical effect.
It's a practical effect, but more than that, it's not like an effects payoff shot. It's not. They don't draw attention to it. It's just a sort of like, oh, we've sort of got to show it's in space, so we're going to do this, and it just sort of like caught my eye. I was like, that's an interesting little piece to add in there to what is basically CCTV footage.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a really cool little idea.
Yeah. No, I mean, so there's a lot to say there about, that design. First of all, I love rocket ships. I love the sort of like 50s rocket ships.
Did you, sorry, I was going to say before, because we also mentioned before when we talked about When Worlds Collide. Again, I said you like the design of the spaceship. I love it's that cylindrical sort of thing with the wings on and stuff. I think it is. It's a really cool, very sleek design.
I love those 50s designs. And I was thinking of like Destination Moon, which maybe we'll watch someday. But that also has like a classic rocket ship, and the layout there is very important of the ship, and it's bigger. But there again, like a lot of times you watch these movies and you think, boy, you've got a lot of room on that ship, right? Yeah. Like, especially compared to like the Apollo, capsule, and you think like, men just cramped up inside, and like, hope there's not a fire. Yeah, it's just horrifying, like tight quarters. And even the International Space Station is maybe about as roomy as this rocket ship is in 55. So I mean, I had simultaneously the thought like, boy, that looks absurdly roomy for 55. And then the thought of like, well, no, they've got it a lot closer to right than, other visions of rocket ships at that time, where space is just, it is cheap. It's going to look like an apartment.
Yeah.
They got room for your monkey.
There's a couple of bits that I find, because it looks good, like it's basically because they acknowledge that all they had was a cabin. Like there's again a drop line of like, oh, there's just this cabin and the rest is fuel. Like this long, so again it's well thought out. They're like, oh, they're just this bit. The one bit I think that's funny, and again it's sort of, you're not supposed to ask these things, I suppose. When the spaceship crashes and it crashes head first, or point first, so it's got like its wings sticking out, and then the door opens. And the astronaut comes, its Karoon comes sort of rolling out, and then Quatermass and Suthers go in, and so they walk into this ship, and then when they go in the cabin's the right way up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I was a bit like, wait a minute, how does that work? Like that, is it on like a gimbal? Is it like rotating round? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, there's a couple of moments like that where I'm like, we're not supposed to ask this question. We're just supposed to sort of carry on. But
yeah, that's a good point. I honestly, I hadn't even thought of that. But it would have been even cooler if they had, because obviously they've got it, on some sort of thing to achieve that FX shot, right? They're rotating it, and it does seem like I like that they do that. I felt like it's the obligatory, like, this is in another gravity. We've got to do something with that. We can't show zero gravity. So what we're going to do is just do this. I mean, they do act oddly like gravity is enhanced, like they're sort of stumbling around and really struggling with this.
I think it's supposed to be like magnetic boots or something like that, isn't it? But yeah.
I mean, it looks awkward, although I love that shot. I was impressed with that shot too. But you'd think that since they were doing that anyway, that somebody could take that set, and once you're done with the astronaut shots, you know, put it on an incline, and that would have been a really awesome, you know, experience. You know, how cool would that have been to see those characters navigating this destroyed, you know,
Interior.
at an angle? Yeah.
You know, they have a couple of like pipes hanging out or some wires hanging out, and they're sort of, you know, just to sort of throw you some notion that it's a bit disheveled. But other than that, it seems perfectly fine and on the right angle.
I found myself more troubled by, like, how do you survive? Like, there's no cushions. There's no, like, what is the mechanism that keeps anyone alive?
Yeah, how did Karun survive this? Because he should be a pancake on that wall. Like, yeah. And the fact that the spacesuits are all in the same place they were when the alien invaded the ship. Like, one's still lying perfectly on the cabin, over the cabin. I'm like, wow, that's very neat. Yes. No, it is good. I like the designs. I think that's the thing. Because I like the fact that I think they've gone for like an element of realism, if you will, to then make, I think, the alien seem more shocking at the end. Because you know, they've tried to keep it quite grounded. But I also think they've done that to sort of highlight the horror of what the alien does to the human. You know, because it does kill several people. And when it does, it sort of saps some of their life force or whatever, their juices, or some sort of like vampiric act. And when you see them, it's part of their heads like is eroded away to reveal sort of like skull-like remains in this. And I like that. Again, it's a good effect. It looks good. It's not overexposed. And you know, as a sort, because this is a sci-fi horror film that they are trying to show you some sort of horror-y bits. So again, it's a nice little touch for a film in '55. So I do like those when you see the sort of the private investigator and the chemist, and they show that little part of the face as being sort of like one. I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, I like that too. I want more of it. I mean, it seems like it looks good, but it's designed to be seen for 2 seconds, you know, before you cut away, so you don't look too closely. I did think that, like, that was one of the more successful victims. I did think that the private investigator who conveniently is killed in the elevator, like, that's kind of a cool scene. But then, you know, like the wife doesn't say like, "Hey, where's that private investigator who broke you out?" You know, they literally just left his corpse there. That seemed a little convenient. And then the pharmacist, that is of all of the sort of like Scream murders, it is the most melodramatic and the quickest, you know, as he sort of screams and then apparently he's been shoved into a closet. Like the alien doesn't seem to show that kind of concern for
anything else. Yeah.
Right. And that's not the other astronaut who's a chemist who's apparently trying to kill himself. You know, because he has no interest in like hiding the evidence of where they are. If anything, he'd want the police right on his butt. So it's a little strange.
Yeah, it is a little inconsistent. Yeah, I like the fact that like the first thing it does, before it attacks humans, it looks for energy because that's what it's doing. It's not looking just for humans. You know, this isn't sort of, when I say it's vampiric, like the first thing he attacks in that way is a cactus.
Yes.
You know, and then later he goes to a zoo and you see that they've done the same. He's attacked animals in the zoo. And so it's not just humans. And I found that really cool as well. Like this, you know, to go back to that Lovecraftian horror kind of thing, that those Lovecraftian ideals. They talk about this being at one point. Quatermass and the other guy talk about this being a way of invading a planet, and it's not. There's no intent behind this. There's no sort of like alien intelligence that's like sort of like Mars Attacks, who say, "Nice planet, we'll take it." It's not that. It's just following its reproductive cycle. It's just following its life cycle, and part of that is to get energy. And the way it does it is this sort of energy sucking act. Human, plant, animal, it doesn't matter. And so I like the fact that there's this sort of like there's no there's no escape from it. It doesn't matter what you are potentially just food to it, which I think is again a really cool idea that opens it up to. It's not just it's not just hunting animals. This will destroy everything on this planet.
Well, I mean, again, that's another thing it does really well is so often we see versions of this story in which they are just obsessed with human victims, right? And you think, well, what's going on with the animals? I mean, it's true of like zombie movies too, where you think, what's going on with these animals? How are they not affected? But I like that it's extended to plants. The cactus thing is a little weird because it seems like he sort of like loses control and like throws the plant. I mean, it's not really clear. And then the wife describes his hand as gray with, thorns of a cactus. So it's like, has the cactus like become part of his hand? Like that's a cool idea. Like he's got sort of like a porcupine quills on his arm. Like he's sort of animal, vegetable, mineral man, kind of thing. That's a cool idea, but it's not really followed through.
No, it's never clear. But there's this constant theme of absorption, isn't there? Like they talk about the fact it's Karun, but it's also Green in there, and the other astronaut, and then this thing with the cactus. It's sort of like the thing you see at the end is a blob. It's almost like it's an amalgam of everything that's gone before, and that's again the reason. The point is at the end, the original ending of being able to reach into that one thing amongst the many. Is in that intelligence, whatever you want to call it, but that human intelligence, that little bit, that spark that's left. That's sort of like the triumph of the end of the original ending. Isn't followed through in this, but I do like this idea that it's absorbed everything. Everything's absorbed, so it's a bit cheetah, it's a bit cactus, it's a bit human, it's a bit whatever. And it's so become this sort of like gelatinous mass of all these different things. Is quite a cool idea. Like it's no one thing. It's just everything. It's just going to devour everything and absorb it.
Yeah, I quite like that idea. I do agree with you. I want more of it, right? I mean, I want the cactus thorns. I mean, I want like what is the cacti consciousness? Like, I want that stuff. I love that weird shit.
Yeah, the potential for that, and that's why I think, like, again, if you were to revisit this with a modern eye, you could do so much with this, of looking at that thing around consciousness and and this idea of humanity, and again, and communicating sort of like this idea of if it was not just absorbing energy or essence, like it was absorbing some sort of consciousness from each of these things as well. So this idea of being able to communicate and the human element coming back and being like, yeah, I've communicating somewhere like, yeah, I've communicated with animals now. Like Dr. Doolittle style, like I can now understand all this stuff. We're doing terrible things to the planet and all this other shit. Like, you could bring all kinds of things into it. Like, I like that stuff.
I feel bad for some of those animals in the zoo, it's hard not to when you see them, and you think like, what is its life like? I find myself wondering about that kind of consciousness anyway, plant consciousness, animal consciousness. I don't know where that zoo is. Where is it that it's right off Westminster?
Yeah. Oh, well, there is a London Zoo. I think the geography of this film is a little short, as is often the case in films. When they go like these 4 landmarks, they're awfully close together, and then you look and you go, they're really not. They're not. And I know that for any city in any film,
Well, I mean, we make films here in America in which Washington D.C. is filled with skyscrapers,
Yeah.
and people go from skyscrapers to like the National Mall, So like, it's hard to fault the BBC or to fault Hammer in '55.
Yeah. But yeah, the that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, so I do love that this idea of this alien being, this essence. I think you could do that. What I like though, and what I find interesting is if we go back to Quatermass in '55. When we've talked about this with the other films as well, there's this sort of optimism of discovery. This idea of going out and doing the we're going to build a rocket and we're going to do this stuff. Like it's this new frontier. It's very sort of Star Trekky. It's really cool. Like they're doing an awful lot of stuff, and I kind of admire that. That like yeah, all right. His attitude towards it's probably not the healthiest, but there's a real sort of like I don't know. We've sort of like we've done this. We've built a rocket.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? We've sent it up. And, he's not entirely wrong when he says, I've sent a rocket up and I've got it back. That's quite an achievement. Because she's like, yeah, you know what? It sort of is. However, like you say, I do question the ethics of private, even today, private enterprises conducting these kinds of experiments, because it's that thing of like where's the checks and balances, how's it being funded, what's it and I always laugh. It's the voice, it's swings and roundabouts, as we all say, because I think I've seen things where you talk about the spaceship that's been built for NASA, which is obviously government funded, and it's built by a contractor who basically could put in the lowest bid.
Yeah.
But in an enterprise, a private enterprise, there's concerns there as well around sort of like compassion and ethics and that sort of thing. I don't know. I sometimes ponder on these things of like, okay, so if Elon Musk or one of these
Bezos.
others, Jeff Bezos, if they do this, like what's that mean? Where's the controls for that?
Well, I mean, I think it ultimately means that we failed. It means that government failed. And I'm with you in the sense that, I mean, first of all, I love that optimism too. I think we should still have that optimism. If there is one thing that we have seen, I mean, think about how primitive the world was in 1955 compared to today. I mean, we're recording this on the internet, through one of a million different programs that does the things like this that have been integrated into our lives so that people don't have to go to schools or go to work in the middle of a pandemic. Like, that's amazing. And we should be in awe of that as humans, that, we as a species did that. That's also one reason, by the way, to trust the scientists and, maybe not be such a dick about, well, I know better with my conspiracy theories and know nothing mentality. But I mean, I still am an optimist. I mean, I think that if humanity doesn't destroy itself, we have a bright future, and the arc of history is long, but bends toward justice, and it also bends toward greater technological achievement and also greater societies, bigger societies of non-zero sum organization. I mean, one reason why I am pro EU among many, it's just we're stronger together. And there are benefits to that. So, I still believe in that kind of optimism. The SpaceX thing and this sort of private thing is, I feel like I love that we're doing that. I think ultimately what's going to happen is, I mean, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to mine the hell out of the asteroid belt. And, it's all going to be sent back to Earth on, like ion drives that are super cheap, and take years to get back, but, you do it super cheaply. I mean, that's what I think is most probable. But I mean, eventually, you're going to have obviously we already have paid trips into outer space and things like that. You know, at some point you're probably going to be able to, get to the moon, if you pay enough money. My problem, I have the same qualms that you probably do about that being private. My concern is like, look, government has failed. When I see these launches, I think, thank God, because I don't want that future to be private either, but I want that future. And I don't know that humanity has a future if we don't do these things, quite frankly. If anything else, it's insurance. We don't have all our eggs in one basket.
Yeah, but then you get the difference of saying, well, I suppose government's not any better, but like, it's that thing of the gatekeeper-ness of that. Then, if it becomes a capitalist endeavor, like you say, then it becomes of like, okay, well, then there's that, you or I are never really going to probably afford to be able to be taken to the moon or even up into space. It's, what was it? I think
we will. We'll just be flying it and peeing into bottles while we do it for minimum wage.
That's true. There will be that. Yeah, we'll be in the luggage compartment doing something. But it's I don't know. To me, like you say, you're right to come back. Government fails. I mean, the fact that even in the 50s. There was a notion that we were going to have the British rocket group, and there is still now
Ministry of Space.
Yeah,
I love it.
We were going to have these things at one point, and then we sort of went, nah, it's too expensive. We've got enough problems.
If only you were part of a consortium of other kind of rich countries, that together could pool your resources and do something like that.
And especially when especially not just just like financial and intellectual resources and really sort of like have done something special on this front. That'd have been amazing. And
it'd be awesome. Like I hear the Germans used to be really good with rockets. They're good engineers. It'd be really cool if you could like pool your resources with those dudes.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, what's going to happen now is that consortium is probably going to do that. And then we're going to have to pay, an extra 50 to 150%, input duty to actually do anything to actually access it at all. But yes, no, it's true. I don't understand why. You see these things. Australia's sort of doing stuff again. They're trying to do things, and I think it's fantastic. I think these endeavors are important, and I often think back to not too far after this film was released. Obviously, Kennedy saying by the end of this decade we'll put a man on the moon. There's just a drive that I think
nobody knew how to do it, right? I mean, that was just an idea. That was a theory. Nobody knew how to do it, and look at the percentage of our GDP that we spent on on the NASA program. It was shocking. You're spending like 10% of your GDP on in some years. That was an aggressive thing. That was a wonderful thing, and nobody knew how to do it. We just decided, and it probably wouldn't have happened, frankly, if he hadn't died, because then there was the impetus to really do it. And we were fighting the Cold War, so it was like, hey, the Russians beat us in the space race, and like, 20-something out of 30 points. Mm-hmm. So, there was that other impetus. But, yeah, I mean, we should be doing those things. But the flip side is, like, we're not in the alien realm yet, right? Of like total corporate, catastrophe. And I think that, there is room for hope. There is, there have been a lot of technological progress that I am really optimistic about.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the day that Elon Musk changes his name of his company to Weyland-Yutani, and then I just know that we're done for.
Don't say that, because Elon Musk you think about what he's done with like Dogecoin and stuff. Yeah. Like he might do it just for the shits and giggles.
Yeah, he may buy the rights off Disney and be like, I wish to name my company Weyland-Yutani. It's a double-edged sword, because I do think more should be done, and I do look at the world and I look at the 60s, and I don't want to glorify the 60s because they were a difficult time for a lot of people. There was other stuff going on. I'm not going to say tamper the civil rights, but in another way, there was a huge sort of like, yeah, things could be better. We can do something. We can move forwards. There's a reason that the counterculture movement really kicked off in the 60s, because there was this idea of hope, of like, yeah, we're moving forwards. We're looking at a better future, the age of Aquarius and all that crap. Like, we haven't got that right now. And if anything, we've edged away from it because of this ridiculous nationalism of sort of like, whether it be America first or Brexit for you and I. But you see it across other areas as well. You see it in Italy, and there was these other countries with this idea of sort of like shrinking the scope of a country to be more nationalistic. And you should be going, no, let's pool our resources. We've all got fantastic people, fantastic talent, fantastic, minds in our countries. Don't hold on to them. Let's share this stuff and start looking to the stars. Let's look into these things, and start looking at ways of doing things. And I think at the moment as well, we're on the verge of 5G, and people think that causes all kinds of problems. Like, I don't think
the conspiracy theory nonsense.
Yeah. I mean,
well, there was an attack in your country on those towers, right?
There was. Because which made me that is a literal Luddite attack on technology. Whether it be a printing press or a 5G tower, like there's a literal Luddite attack. It baffles me. But again, like we go back to this idea of like, I remember whenever technology advances in a certain way, there's fear. I remember, and this isn't me yearning back to a yesteryear. This is literally when they turned on the CERN super collider.
The Hadron.
And there were people that were like, "Right, it's going to happen on this date, and they're going to flip the switch, and this collider is going to get turned on, and it's going to do these things, blah blah blah." And it's this big, and they show you where the donut runs under all the mountains and these places, and that's amazing. The flip side is it could turn the Earth into a black hole.
Well, yeah, I thought that the theory was it could make a miniature black hole that then grows and basically,
engulf the world. Yeah. And so so there's all these things that go like, well, the percentage chance of that is this, and there's like there's all these zeros and then a 1 at the end of it or something like that. And so they're like, so really, it's pretty safe. Like we're quite confident this is going to happen. But there were still news headlines of mad scientists want to destroy the world. To prove God particle or whatever it was that they were doing at the time, and you just sort of like, there was, there was. I mean, I don't know if it was religious based, but there was this thing of like, this new crazy technology, sort of like, what's it going to prove, sort of thing. And every time we have these technological advances, there's going to be the people that just sort of go, no, because it's dangerous or whatever. And you do that. That's the unfortunate. That's when I do sound like Brian Dunleavy. I'm like, switch it on. Yeah. Switch it on and do it.
Well, right. Well, I mean, so I'm going to say something totally optimistic. I am at my best when I remember we're basically chimpanzees with skyscrapers. Okay. We did not evolve to make rocket ships, as cool as we think we are. And that is. We're chimpanzees living in skyscrapers. So we're still really dumb. We're still really concerned with sex and food and, immediate stuff. Our brains are not optimized for long-term thinking. So with that in mind, think about how far we've come. It was not that long ago that the idea that we didn't live in a geocentric universe caused somebody to have their life destroyed. We're not, we are not that far from burning witches. I mean, okay, so we are there's still this kind of like fear, but if that fear manifests itself as some newspaper headlines and some conspiracy theorists on YouTube instead of putting Galileo on house arrest, we're actually doing pretty well. Like that's a good
Yeah.
progression in a relatively small number of years. But it's that wider view that I find lacking. It's, in the long run, I mean, what Quatermass should say here is, look, we've got this thing cornered. I don't know how we know its reproductive life cycle, but we've just encountered alien life for the first time. And yes, it's deadly to us and it's dangerous, but we seem to have it cornered. There's not a lot of life in the scaffolding inside Westminster. Let's capture this somehow. We don't really have to worry too much about it getting away, but let's make sure that we do. And, that would be incredible. How much better is that than destroying it? And so looking at the scale of hundreds of years, I get it. We all have to eat. We all have our immediate concerns. We get horny and we care about our families, and, that's natural and normal and fine. But, the thing about nationalism is, sure, it is normal to put your kin group above the larger group, to put your nation above the larger nation. Of course, you should recognize the non-zero sum possibilities of working together that benefit everybody. But in the long run, we'll all be dead, as George W. Bush brilliantly said. Yeah. And in 1,000 years, your nation and my nation probably will not be on this planet. Yeah. And the world will still be here. The apocalypse isn't going to happen. The rapture is not going to happen. And so maybe let's make sure that while we take care of ourselves right now, we also optimize for where we are as a species and a planet in 1,000 years, because that's really going to matter. That's, ultimately. Of course, nobody's paid to think like that because, we got to win our next election cycle. Yeah,
and that's obviously where democracy starts to sort of fall down a little bit, because it's about the immediate cycle rather than the long term. I'm not saying that I'm advocating any of the political system, but I don't have a solution. Just saying.
Well, that's one reason why, as weird as they are, I mean, Bezos and Musk have some of the freedom to not worry about that. I mean, it's a miracle we did the space program, and it needed Kennedy's death, and Johnson was able to funnel all this money to it. Nixon was able to complete it. It was basically handed to him, and he was able to complete it. But that's very rare that you have three different administrations being able to work like that on such a massive project. Never would have happened without the Cold War. Somebody like Musk or Bezos, who doesn't get enough credit in this regard, is, for all of their problems, and I'm not ignoring any of that, they have the freedom to ignore elections.
Yeah. Well, they can think bigger, I suppose. I mean, when you say that, there are two things that sort of spring to mind. And the first one is, one of my favorite shows ever is Yes Minister / Yes Prime Minister. And there's a thing in that where Sir Humphrey Appleby talks to Jim Hacker about Jim Hacker being the minister, so he's obviously got to face voters and that sort of thing, and Appleby being a civil servant. And at one point, Hacker calls him out on not fully supporting one of his ideas, and he says, "I've been doing this for 15 years. If I followed every minister's decision and stuff to the letter, I'd have been a staunch unionist and an anti-unionist. I'd have been for the EU and against the EU." And he goes on to these things. And at the end of the day, I'd have been a complete schizophrenic. He says, "I am here as the civil service. We have to think long term, not just what the immediate government wants." And it's obviously played for laughs and stuff, but it's true. Mm-hmm. You see this, and this is one of the things I hear from teachers and stuff a lot is, about the education system is, well, yeah, the last government wanted to do this, then the new government came in, we've got a new education minister, and they think that it should be done this way, so we now have to change the curriculum or adjusting the curriculum. So the last 4 years is now going to be different to the next 4 years, and then after that we'll probably get someone different, so we're going to have to adjust it again, and the focus will move from math sciences into something else, and then something else, or we'll have all the money taken away from music and put into drama, or like we call it, we say there's a status quo, And there clearly is within parameters, but within those parameters, it's a little bit up and down all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that's the problem, is you don't get to see that long-term view. But you're right. People like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk can do that, because they can look to the bigger picture and sort of say, yeah, that's what we need to be doing. Here's where the future lies. I'm going to make some, big sort of like daddy bucks out of it, but that's where the future's got to lie. And the other thing you made me think about is I saw a picture recently of Jeff Bezos literally driving a sort of a lifting robot akin to what Ripley rides in at the end of Aliens. And there's a part of me that goes, that's cool, and there's another part of me that sort of just thinks, oh, that this isn't going to end well, is it? Really? Like, how soon before that's armored and going into war, sort of.
Oh no, I mean that's clear, right? I mean
Yeah.
we're already fighting wars with drones, right? I mean that will be armored and at war. It just will be a robotic pilot. You don't probably need the human pilot. But I mean that's going to happen. So I mean, I am pro drone. I am pro human cloning. Not because I don't think there aren't ethical issues with both, but these are things that are just going to happen. You
Yes.
can't tell Barack Obama, like, stop droning, because, no, the issue is transparency. We want transparency, right? You can't say, like, we're going to fight wars endlessly with boots on the ground. No, this is the way it's going to be. We might as well get ahead of the ball, but we need to be transparent about it. Human cloning is the same thing. If we don't do it, the Chinese are going to do it. I'd much rather it happen under American supervision and with American patents involved, or EU patents. Let's do it that way. But you can't stand in the way of
Progress.
of progress. That it's all the ethical debates will be handled later. We'll figure them out. I don't really mean that, but
there was
I love Quatermass.
Yeah.
Well, in the long run, he's a dick. But if the end result is we got into space in 1955,
he's not wrong.
That's awesome.
This is the thing. It's that thing of like, he's not wrong, but it's the way he goes about things is probably, there's a way of, I think the characterization needs refining at this point. But you talk about progress and ethics, and I think that's the other thing, is about the ethics of this, of sort of like, the thing of sending humans up, and you don't get the context. You don't know what he tested before. There might have been a whole bunch of chimps or dogs or whatever has been sent up beforehand. But ethics in science is always concerned. They recently I saw combined the DNA of humans and chimps, or is it of a monkey? I don't think it specified what. They literally created an egg, a fertilized egg of a chimera between human and ape DNA, and then they let it sort of gestate for a certain amount of time, and then they terminate it and stuff like that. But there's a part of it, it's like you say, it's going like, it's a bit like Jurassic. I always think back to Jeff Goldblum's line. You're so busy about what you're asking, deciding whether or seeing if you could. You never stop to see whether you should. But that should is irrelevant. Like, so at some point, progress always goes forward. It's going to go down some dark alleys. I mean, in this season, we're going to talk about Gattaca, and that's going to open up some really interesting conversations on that front. But again, space travel is interesting, because this thing, like you said, he sent it up without any sign up. He literally gets called out for it, and the minister of sort of says, "You sent it up without authorization, without the proper paperwork, blah blah." And he says, in Quatermass' response is like, "If I waited for you, there would, you would never get anywhere. There'd always be a status quo," and that's fair. He calls out the government on it, and he's right. However, there's also this thing of like, it returns and crashes into a farm. Could have killed anybody. We don't know what radiation. The thing comes back with an alien on it for a start, but you don't know you don't know what radiation it's going to come back with. You don't know. This thing could have landed in a city or a village and killed hundreds of people. Like, what was your return plan for this thing?
In the long run, it doesn't matter, but that doesn't mean that you can't have civilian oversight, that you shouldn't have, government ethics there to say, look, I mean, you look at what NASA did in the space program, and it's astounding. Especially, I mean, we burned a bunch of astronauts alive in '67, but I mean, and obviously all astronauts deserve some credit for their courage, but it's astounding the safety protocols and backup systems and how much money and energy and just the best technicians on the planet working on backup systems and safety concerns that we didn't need to do. I mean, we could have just I mean, the Soviet Union wasn't doing it. But I mean, there's a role for that too. There's a balance to be struck there. But I mean, and I don't want to sound like Ayn Randian, like, Quatermass, can't be held down by, the common folk who want to restrict his vision. Humanity is steered forward by such visionaries. But, in the long run, I mean, enough time passes and, it's like, hey, yeah, I
mean, in the long run, like you say, those three astronauts would have a plaque on a wall just to highlight, that they were heroes. And Quatermass would have developed technology that would then go on to help further rocket ship. So it swings around about duty versus the greater good. That sort of thing as well. But this is where I honestly think that Quatermass is due a return in this day and age. And I said it when we did Quatermass in the Pit. I just think watching this film, even more so, I want a sort of a grounded sci-fi series like this. It's not all about interstellar travel, but we can try all kinds of things, and just has this science basis, at the bottom of it all. It's going to be sci-fi science, but you could then use to deal with sort of things like the ethics of these things, and we could deal with some of this stuff in the modern age.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, would your Quatermass be, because even if he's a nice guy in this, right, he's still the Elon Musk, right? He's still, that's a very different guy than the sort of like scientific expert, sort of, government scientific Sherlock Holmes of Quatermass in the Pit. If you are to do a series or a revival, where would you strike that line?
I think I would. So if you watch, I think I would do something like, we will do, right? I definitely recommend watching Quatermass 2 as well, because there's some interesting bits and pieces in that. I think I would look at having an arc for him. Like, he would start at this point. Like, I would have him as probably in his mid to late 40s. He's worked his lot. He's been, he's lived in a laboratory. He's worked. That's where he's lived and worked. He's dedicated his life to this thing of the British Rocket Group, or the, whatever it is that he works for, this private endeavor. And I would say that this first, I wouldn't have the ending that this has. That ending of him just basically storming off like some petulant little child and just saying, I shall start again. It just pisses me off. But I think this first series would be him. You would go from this version to the Andrew Keir version, because I think you'd start with this version that's sort of like, no, I'm doing good. I'm bringing around the better world. I'm doing this for the greater good. I'm trying to save the world or whatever. Just being so sort of obsessive and belligerent in his barreling forwards with these ideas. And then you would start to see it chip away that, this is the impact he's had, not just on the astronauts, but the astronauts had families, and because of him, these people have died, and this other thing. And you go, okay, actually, there's ethics involved in this. Like, I've got to rethink some of this stuff that we're doing. And I think I would build on it, and you could do like 4 or 5 seasons, and you end with Quatermass in the Pit, where you get to an older guy that's like, yeah, do you know what? Like, we've got to. I would have him. I liked your idea of capturing this thing, like him being the advocate of saying, no, look, we've got to keep this. Like, we've discovered this thing, and we've got to capture it and do whatever. Or again, but that's something else I want to mention. But that would be my journey. He would go on a journey from sort of like traveling from the Brian Dunleavy version to the anti-care version. But I like him starting at this point. Like if he's dedicated his life to this is his mission, this is his goal. And then almost to see that taken away from him because it's a bit of a bloody clusterfuck, then fine, do that. And then have him learn. And as he encounters more things, learns that, you know what, this is a big, crazy, weird world or universe that we live in. And we've got to be a little less bullish about it all. And, you know, let's be and he gets wiser as he gets older. And then you end with that version that's a bit wiser and a bit more
very concerned with the civilians, you know, I mean, fighting the military, advocating for common people.
Yes, that sort of and journeying from that. I think that would be a really interesting sort of, because the thing is, we've had all these characters, you know, Sherlock Holmes doesn't change. You know, like you sort of use it as an example. Doctor Who, he changes from character to character, like from actor to actor, but there's no great arc of him learning a great lesson. It's just adventure after adventure. You know, always being on the side of good. I think this idea of having someone, especially in this day and age, because I think it'd be interesting to have a character that's so obsessively scientific or scientistic that they'd be like, bloody anti-vaxxers, ridiculous. People can't be wearing masks, ridiculous. Like literally, like, you know, vehemently hating on all these people that are sort of anti-science.
So
to start, basically. But in a more sort of like almost, you know, looking down them and then eventually coming around and sort of saying, not wanting to understand where these people have come from, just what, no, they're all morons. Because I mean, that's how Brian O'Leary comes across a little bit in this. I mean, there's several people he talks to who's like, shut up. And then he's just that sort of like, I'm the smartest person in the room. Everyone do as I say. And I want to see him travel past that and become this thing of going like, no, we need to educate people. We need to have information available. We need to make this understandable to people. You know, I understand that I've lived a life of academia and and scholarly development. These people haven't. I need to protect and help support these people.
These people. No, I mean, I was with you until the anti-vaxxing and masking stuff. So I like the arc of him sort of like coming to realize, like, yeah, these astronauts had family, you know, like, and sort of softening as he gets older, right? I mean, I like this arc, but that's within the context of his own concerns and his own scientific endeavors, you know, and his own response to, you know, different alien encounters or what have you. You know, when it comes to, I mean, look, I mean, the world, but certainly both of our countries are beset by, you know, anti-science contingents. And I think that there's only so much compassion we can have. I mean, I am on the side of this, you know, mean version of Quatermass.
Yeah.
When it comes, I mean, you know, I just think the only proper response is to say, shut the fuck up. You're stupid. You know, why are you on TV? You know, we are going to question your license if you put these people on.
Don't get me wrong. Like, he's not going to become soft. Like, I wouldn't have him become a complete softie and sort of like say mollycoddle them. It'd just be more of a sort of like, instead of just saying like, you know, you're stupid and you're wrong, sort of as and shutting it down. I think it's this journey of sort of saying, no, we have a responsibility to educate and to make sure that people understand this. But then it also, that then goes against, to the battle then changes, because his initial battle would be a head-on. It would almost be like he would be going onto Facebook or Twitter and taking on the anti-vaxxers, and he'd be the one debating with them and like getting nowhere because they're not going to take it on. You know, they don't believe him because they're not wanting to believe. And his battle would switch to going, right, well, in that case, then I loathe Fox News. I loathe, you know, Tory propaganda. I loathe these things. They're the things I've got to take on. They're the things that I'm now saying to the government, you need to stop this crap because this is the thing that's polluting our country and is actually making it. These things are coming from somewhere. You know, like I'd happily have a part of an episode, because obviously there's only 3 real stories. There's Quatermass Experiment, Quatermass 2, Quatermass in the Pit. There's more stories to be had there, other seasons. I'd love it if, in an X-Files kind of way, Quatermass versus Big Tech. Like he's going like, now what you're doing here is great. What you're allowing to happen on your platform is crap.
Yeah.
And I don't think he would lose almost all of his brusqueness because that's who he is. But it's that learning of how to direct it, where he needs to be fighting his fights.
So I mean, obviously you're talking about sort of setting this in the present day. If the first one is him starting out as a sort of like Elon Musk figure, does he get into outer space? I mean, what's the obviously he's got some sort of SpaceX kind of thing going, right? That's fine, that's easy to do, but what happens? You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know what don't these episodes change? I'm imagining that you're talking about sort of like each season is sort of like a mini series of like 8 episodes, and telling the first one, Quatermass 2, and Quatermass in the Pit, and maybe new stuff in between and after. But and I like what you're talking about. My question is, how do you envision? One of the things we've talked about in both of these movies has been how like the world has changed as a consequence of these events, right? Like you pointed out, people are aware there are aliens, right? After the first one. And by the third one, it's like we've all seen like the devil in the sky, this. Yeah,
I think it would be. I think I don't think you could change. Could I do it as a period piece? No, I don't know if it would work these days. I think it's too. It would be too distant, so I don't think people would engage it. I think you need to have it in the modern day. But I think I would have it. Yes, I would have. It would start in present day, normal present day, and then basically you would create your own the Quaterverse. Let's call it that, where the events of the first series have an impact. However, let's take things into consideration. I mean, events happen every day. Yeah. This is an alien sort of like, again, it would probably be about scale. This is a single alien going through London. I was going to say rampaging, not wholly rampaging. It's going through London. This event happens. Yeah. Do you know what? Several years ago, we had our own bombing attack. We had a bunch of buses blown up and that. And then we off air, we were talking about during the 80s, we had the troubles with Northern Ireland. You guys had, in America, let's not forget 9/11. Like, we remember these things, but they have an impact. But, it has to be sort of 9/11 had a national conscious jerking effect. It was broadcast live on television and had this massive impact. I can see if it needs to have a real jarring effect. I can really see that if you were to do this episode and something like the alien at the end of this was to get on TV, you would have Quatermass be the one that's saying, yeah, right, the genie's out of the bottle. We now need to be engaging with the public. I mean, think about the end of, it's not really it's in the TV show, but in the end of the Quatermass in the Pit, like he goes on air and he's like, yeah, no, we've got to face up to the fact that actually, human life started on Mars and we're not humans, we're crickets, basically. We've got to get used to that. Thank you very much. And walks off. That's, I think, is the end point of the show. Like that to me is the end point. Is him actually, but in this one, you maybe get a glimpse of the alien and then the government switch it off. And then afterwards it's like, oh, it was this, it was that, it was whatever. And Quatermass is the one going, this is ridiculous. Like, we've got footage of this thing. I can't believe people are ignoring it. Yeah. Some people are saying it's aliens, but then it's getting quashed because others are saying it's this and that, and it was 5G, it was whatever. There would be conspiracy theories all around it, and because of the conspiracy theories, the truth gets lost in the mix because the truth seems even more ridiculous than 2 other conspiracy theories that exist next to it. So it gets lost in the shuffle. So the world doesn't change.
This is like I'm a big Transformers fan, right? One of the conceits after the first Bay film is that like the government has, and it's not the only series that does this. It's like the government has successfully spun this as, this didn't really happen. These weren't aliens, and conspiracy theorists are like, no. And it's so ridiculous because it's in a major metropolitan city. Everybody's got like cell phone footage of like Starscream transforming and rampaging through the streets. There's no hiding this. It's like, oh, that was a mass hallucination. It was a sundog. No, but here you're right. Here they could successfully spin that.
Yeah,
That's a very good point. You could do that. My question is, as the series goes on, that history is going to deform, right? You talk about like the Quaterverse, right? Yeah. That history is going to deform, right? You're going to have
it would grow. I mean, that's what I would have. Like the end result would be, I think, and it would almost be like the I Am Iron Man moment of at the end of it, like the end of the show would be him after the Quatermass in the pit and being on a show, and his job is now, you're the expert. You've got to go on the air. You are now obliged as your role in the government because you've escalated up. Think of it like Jack Ryan in in the Clancy. Was it Tom Clancy? No, it was his. Eventually becomes beaten president. Like I would have it like he's escalated through, and every now and then there'd be like, look, let's just promote him or let's give him a bit of a nudge, just to maybe a sideways move. It looks like it's up, but we're actually putting him out on a. And that would lead to the second story or whatever, like, the Quatermass 2. But eventually, he then has got to a position where, look, your job is to now sit on this panel in front of everyone on the TV, call it question time, whatever the hell it is, and you will tell them that what people saw and that hallucination that caused that riot in London wasn't the effect of a 5 million old or 50 million year old or whatever it is spaceship populated by life-creating aliens. It was something else. And then him sitting there, and the final thing would be him, having his papers, and he's got this dilemma of saying, well, I can quash this, or I can tell the truth. And then him standing up and him telling the truth. I mean, it might be a bit cliche, I don't know, but him telling the truth, and that's the end. He's like, no, I'm giving up everything now to tell the truth. Because that's actually sort of the story that Nigel Neal, is that at the end of Quatermass in the pit, it drives Quatermass not mad, but he basically drives him to a point where he is. He sort of says, I've had enough, and he storms off. And he actually goes to live in the Scottish Highlands. And then there's a TV show called Quatermass that was done in the 80s. And then Quatermass ends up having to go look for a relative. It's actually his granddaughter, which doesn't quite make sense because he doesn't have a family. But he goes looking and finds out the rest of the world's gone a bit potty. But that's it. It's sort of like that's the point of Quatermass in the pit, where he reaches a point. He's like, "Screw this! You're just as bad as everybody. I'm out of here." And that's where I want to take it to. That we'd actually keep escalating, and he'd keep going on these adventures, or he'd keep having these things where he has to intervene, and it keeps building to this point of you are culpable in covering some of this stuff up. Mm-hmm. You're just as bad, Quatermass, as everybody else. You think you're this, this bastion of truth. You keep fighting for the truth, but you are no more than, a culprit for all of this stuff. Like, you are just as bad. And eventually that's sort of like what grind him down each time he's had to do something. So, I don't know. I'm thinking on the fly, but that's where I see it. Yeah. It would be the Quaterverse would keep growing, and there would be things like there'd be an acknowledgement of these things, but you could tell smaller stories that don't. I mean, the Quatermass in the pit is the biggie. Like, I would have that be a mass event. Like, that's something that I think would be cool. And I wouldn't have it just over Hobbs End. Like, you'd have some holographic thing over the whole of central London. This thing is seen for miles. Like, that's what you want to see. But emanating from Hobbs End.
And so the government is still like, this was a
5G.
prank.
It was 5G. Yeah, it was some it was a Banksy, and
a laser air Banksy. You know what those things you see at concerts. This was just a more sophisticated version of that.
We were trying to make a big sort of 3D Kanye West, and it just didn't go well. I don't know, but that's I don't know. What do you think? Like, this is where I would go with it anyway.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I definitely want more Quatermass. I'm sold on that. I like the idea of sort of adapting it to our current sort of serialized, style. I mean, finally, we've talked about how these two movies, try to compress too much, and now there'd be room in the current fashion, and also there'd be more focus on character, right? In the current style of writing. So you couldn't just have Quatermass appear and not say anything, and so we don't know anything about him. So a lot of those sort of problems would fix themselves. As far as like the sort of like distortion of the world, I don't know. The concern is always that you have to strike a balance between, on the one hand, being realistic to the plot and what it is that has happened, right? And who would know, right? Or else you get nobody saw Starscream on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
Or so you've got to be honest about that, but you also don't want, in the old classic DC and Marvel way, like you don't want things to distort so much that it's a non-recognizable universe. And I think that one of the things that I am most excited by in what's going on in serialized fiction now is that we are allowing more of that distortion than we did in the past. And so people are much more familiar with the concept of, alternate timelines and, an alternate history in which, you can allow, the idea that we're aware of alien life is okay.
Given time, I think if I could have, I don't know, 5 seasons, 8-episode seasons, you could do it where you could control that distortion, because you could say, okay, well, this one has an effect on this. Like the first one has minimal effect. Quatermass all of a sudden starts appearing in conspiracy theories. Like he's never known before. He's known as this sort of like, he's known in this circles, but all of a sudden he starts to appear as a recognized figure within conspiracy circles, and say, okay, well, he's a bit of an embarrassment now, so we've got to take him away from the public end. So he ends up getting allotted to this thing, which takes you into Quatermass 2. I'm not going to spoil Quatermass 2. In fact, I don't. I want you. We may do it in the future. We may just watch it because I'll have to watch it. It's a really good film. So you end up with Quatermass 2. And again, you have to go, okay, well, we've talked about this with other shows we did. When we did, for example, when we did like Westworld, when we said like, but the impact isn't really thought out. Like, what's the eventual of this? You could do that and sit down and go, okay, this is the story we're going to tell in very small pitch. The impact of this would be this and this. Like you said, who saw this? How would they deal with it? What's the technological advances from this? Bump, move on. And then you could do the stories. And then I would end with Quatermass and the Pit some years later. And I might even do time jumps between them. Like, it's not like, because I also hate that every year just happens to be some crazy adventure.
Yes.
So I'd probably do some time jumps between them. So eventually those 5 seasons would probably take us over a 15-year span. So you'd end up going to the future a bit anyway. And so you'd have to take those sort of things into consideration. So, those are the sort of things I'd probably try and look at. Maybe 10 years, I don't know. But yeah, that's my pitch for whoever's listening to do a Quatermass TV show. Netflix, I'm waiting for your call.
You successfully sold me on Quatermass. It's been a joy to sort of experience this and discover this kind of franchise that I wasn't aware existed.
Yeah, it's an IP that I think is massively underused in British sci-fi and stuff. Like, I don't know what if Nigel Neal or the BBC own the property or own the estate. I have no idea, but it's one of those things I've said before. Like, Doctor Who's got comics, and that seems to be about it. The Doctor Who comics are pretty good. I've read a couple of them, and they're actually really well written and stuff. The Paul Cornell ones in particular are very good. Yeah. Even Neil Gaiman's written some, so you get some heavy hitters. I'm telling you now, I would love Red Dwarf. I want Red Dwarf comic backs. I want some Quatermass stuff. Why aren't these British sci-fi things in print? Like, it's baffling to me, absolutely baffling.
Well,
and
I think
then I'd have my big crossover at the end, which I've always talked about.
well, I think that speaking as an American, we love British stuff. Anything is more, like if French stuff has that Frenchy, like special air about it of sort of like sophisticated, but we don't want to watch the average French movie or TV show because we think it'll probably be too artsy fartsy and black and white and nothing makes sense. So the idea that media is French, it's interesting to me. Like there's no real, French IP that really has taken off here in the same way. But British kind of, it's more approachable. You look at, people are subscribing, just to get access to the BBC stuff, right? People watching The Crown on Netflix, and so definitely there is a lot of room for, another sort of British IP invasion. And I think you're completely right that it is strange that we haven't gotten it because we're fascinated by anything British. There's always that adds a niche market, that adds people just by that fact. People aren't scared about it not being approachable. So, all of this stuff should happen. I'm a fan. I want it to happen.
Yeah. Well, if they're listening, I'm gonna reach out to a few people. Oh, there's a few things that just in my head. It'll never happen. I can't see myself working at the bloody BBC doing a showrunner for these things. But if they did it, it'll be fantastic. But yes, just aware of time. So, Quatermass in the Pit, 1955. I've had a lot to talk about there. And
Quatermass Experiment.
So yes, Quatermass Experiment.
And before we go, I want to say that the title is the Quatermass Experiment without the E. Mm-hmm. And that was because this got the X rating.
It did.
And which means nobody under 18 could go into the movie theater and see this. What the fuck was that for? Like, can you imagine a society so repressed that it's like, that slime mold shot is just too scary for anyone under 18 to see.
There's a part of me, like, I'll finish on this. If I could go back in time, if I had like the DeLorean and I could hop back in time, there's a part of me that would love to go back to sort of like, the BBFC of the 1950s and just be like, that Quatermass film you've just seen. I'd like to introduce you to Hostel. Can you sit down and watch this? Or this is a film by an independent director called Quentin Tarantino. It's called Reservoir Dogs. I just want you to sit for an hour and a half. This was an 18 in 1992. Yeah.
I've got this French movie called Irreversible that you should watch. BBC guy.
Yeah. I find there's a history to be written there that one day I'd love someone to write, and that is about sort of like censorship and rating system in Britain and how those things broke down. Because from where we went, from where we came to where we are now, thinking about like things like The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a lot of things that got banned to to where we're like, yeah, it's now on BBC sort of after 9 o'clock. Sod it.
Well, it's a better world for it. As much as I mean, that repression gets nowhere.
Yes, but yeah, no. So anyway, final thoughts: the Quatermass Experiment, or the Creeping Unknown, known outside of the UK.
Yeah, it's fun stuff. I'm glad I got to watch it. I'm glad you prompted me to do so, and I'm sure that. Maybe it'll be season 4. We'll have to do Quatermass 2. We could always sneak it in. We could always add it.
What year was it? It's 56 or 57, I think, wasn't it? So, but yes, Quatermass 2 is there to be done, a Quatermass special. I love this film. Brian Dunleavy as Quatermass is a bit of an interesting choice, but there's so much in this film that I just really enjoy. And there's more to be done, but it's just like, again, it's one of those IPs where I'm just like, I want more, and this just really whets my appetite. So it's not the best of the Quatermass trilogy, but it's definitely, it's a great concept, great sci-fi, and so yeah, I recommend the Quatermass Experiment as especially for the 50s. Like it's another really good 50s film. So yeah.
Well, Quatermass 2 is 57.
There you go, yeah, 2 years later.
Next time is Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yeah.
Harryhausen.
Yeah.
I mean, 57 is right there, right after.
I'm more than happy. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm gonna be watching it anyway because I've actually bought it digitally. So,
well, let's put it in there between Earth versus the Flying Saucer and the Tinkler.
Okay, we shall insert that. Let's do that then.
You'll someday I will call on you for a favor, and I will insert a movie. In the meantime, I'm very happy to see Quatermass 2.
Let's do that then. We'll have that chance to do that. Also, I'm more than happy to do that. We'll throw in Quatermass 2 from 1957. Again, features Dunleavy. Very different story, and but yeah, it's a corker, that one as well. That's got some interesting stuff in. Okay.
Excellent.
But let's say a decision on air. There you go, people. You've heard us. That's it. Sort of like say democracy in action. But yes, again, this has really enjoyed this one. It's been really good fun. So I'm glad we got to talk Quatermass again. We will do again soon. But Julian, as always, it's been an absolute blast talking this. I hope you enjoyed it.
It's great exploring the 50s and watching stuff I haven't seen before.
Yeah, no, this is all good. I'm actually really looking forward to Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I'm very much looking forward to that.
My money's on those flying saucers. Screw these humans, man. Yeah. I'm so sick of them.
I'm hoping it does take a Mars Attacks twist, and we're both really surprised. But we shall see. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you have some opinions on Quatermass, the Quatermass Experiment, or anything we've talked about today, reach out to us. Find us on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. Or if you want to email me or about the show directly, that's 20thcenturygeek at gmail.com. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. And we will be back next episode with Earth versus the Flying Saucers. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll speak again soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.